He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought a week in Aspen with his mistress was the perfect Christmas present to himself, disguised as a business emergency. Julian Blackwood returned home, expecting a naive wife and a warm dinner. Instead, he found an echoing house, an empty safe, and a single legal document on the kitchen counter that would freeze the blood in his veins. It wasn't a divorce paper. It was a court order. While he was sleeping in another woman's bed, his wife hadn't just left him. She had legally erased his legacy, starting with his son's last name. This is the story of a betrayal that backfired in the most brutal way possible. The obsidian Mercedes S-Class crunched softly over the frosted gravel of the driveway, the only sound in the crisp post-Christmas air. Julian Blackwood exhaled a long plume of vapor as he stepped out, adjusting the collar of his cashmere coat. He felt good. Better than good, actually. He felt invincible. The lie had been perfect. Emergency merger negotiations in Tokyo. It was the kind of excuse that sounded so boring and high stakes that his wife, Elena, never questioned it. While Elena had spent Christmas alone with their 2-year-old son, Harrison, Julian had been in a private chalet in Aspen with Isabel, a 24-year-old marketing coordinator who looked at him as if he hung the moon. He reached into the back seat to grab his briefcase, which he had meticulously packed with duty-free Japanese whiskey and fake receipts he'd bought online, just in case Eleanor asked to see expenses. He prided himself on the details. That was why he was the CEO of Blackwood Logistics, and that was why he believed he could manage 2 lives without them ever colliding. He walked up the stone steps of the sprawling colonial estate in Connecticut. He expected the usual routine. The heavy oak door swinging open before he even turned the key, Elena looking tired but relieved, Harrison toddling toward him, screaming, "Dada!" But the door remained shut. Julian unlocked it, pushing it open. "Elena, I'm home!" he called out, injecting a tone of weary traveler into his voice. The flight was a nightmare. You wouldn't believe the turbulence over the Pacific. Silence. Not the peaceful silence of a sleeping house, but the heavy, sterile silence of a museum after hours. The heating was off. The air inside was biting cold. "Elena?" He walked into the foyer. The 12-foot Christmas tree was still standing in the corner of the living room, but something was wrong. It was dark. He flipped the switch. Nothing. He walked closer and realized why. The lights had been stripped. The ornaments, the antique glass baubles passed down through 5 generations of Blackwoods, the ones his mother had made Eleanor swear to protect with her life, were gone. The tree was naked, a skeleton of pine needles shedding onto the hardwood floor. A knot of unease tightened in Julian's stomach. He dropped his briefcase and ran up the stairs, his footsteps thundering. "Harrison!" He burst into the nursery. The crib was there, but the mattress was bare. The mobile of spinning planets that he had bought for Harrison's first birthday was gone. The changing table was wiped clean. No diapers, no wipes, no smell of baby powder. Just the faint, chemical scent of lemon disinfectant. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced his arrogance. He sprinted down the hall to the master bedroom. He threw the door open. The bed was made with military precision, but not with their usual Egyptian cotton sheets. These were plain white linens, the kind used to cover furniture in empty houses. He went to the walk-in closet. His side was untouched. His Armani suits, his rows of Italian leather shoes, everything was exactly where he left it. He turned to Elena's side. Empty. Not just empty of clothes, but stripped of existence. The velvet hangers were gone. The jewelry safe specifically installed for her collection, open and hollow. Even the carpet seemed to have been vacuumed to remove her footprints. Julian leaned against the doorframe, his breath coming in shallow gasps. She had left. But how? When? He had texted her 3 hours ago from the limo service. Landed safely. "Can't wait to see you and Harry," she had replied. "Safe travels? We're waiting." "We're waiting," he whispered to the empty room. He rushed back downstairs, his mind racing through scenarios. Kidnapping? No. Kidnappers didn't pack clothes and vacuum the floor. A breakdown? Had she gone to her mother's? He went into his home office, needing a drink before he called her parents. He reached for the crystal decanter of scotch on his mahogany desk. That's when he saw it. In the center of the desk, perfectly centered on the leather blotter, was a single, thick envelope. It wasn't sealed. Lying on top of it was his gift to her, the diamond tennis bracelet he had bought 2 months ago, and hidden in the wall, safe behind the painting in the hallway. He froze. The wall safe. He scrambled out to the hallway and ripped the painting of the English fox hunt off the wall. The safe door was wide open. He stared into the dark metal box. It was gutted. The cash reserve, $50,000 he kept for emergencies, gone. The bearer bonds, gone. The passports, his and hers, gone. But worst of all, the hard drive. The external drive where he kept the ledger. The real ledger. The one that documented the offshore accounts in the Caymans that the IRS and Eleanor were never supposed to know about. Julian felt his knees give out. He slid down the wall, sitting on the floor amidst the ruin of his secret life. He looked back at the office, at the envelope waiting on the desk. He crawled back to the desk and picked up the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavy. Premium cardstock. He pulled out the documents. There was no handwritten letter, no tear-stained note asking why or screaming, "How could you?" Elena wasn't a woman who wasted ink on emotion. The first page was a photocopy of a text message log. December 24th, 11:42 p.m. From Julian to Isabel. "She's asleep. God, I miss your skin. 2 days until Aspen, baby. Just hold on." Julian stopped breathing. He remembered sending that text. He had been in the bathroom, the water running to mask the sound of typing. Elena had been in bed, apparently asleep. She hadn't been asleep. He flipped the page. A photo. Grainy, but clear enough. Him and Isabel at the airport terminal, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. He flipped the page again. And this is where the world stopped turning. It was a court order, stamped by a judge in the Family Division of the Superior Court of Connecticut, dated December 26th, the day after he left. Notice of granted petition for change of name. In the matter of the minor child, Harrison James Blackwood, petitioner, Elena Marie Sterling, mother, sole guardian. It is hereby ordered that the name of the minor child be changed from Harrison James Blackwood to Harrison Sterling. Julian stared at the name. Harrison Sterling. She hadn't just taken him. She hadn't just discovered the affair. She had erased him. She had removed the Blackwood name, the name that opened doors, the name attached to the trust funds, the name that Julian's father had made him promise to carry on from his only son. And then, at the very bottom of the stack, a sticky note, her handwriting, sharp and angular. "You wanted a life without consequences, Julian. Now you have a life without us. P.S. I wouldn't bother checking the Cayman accounts." Julian didn't scream. He didn't throw the lamp across the room. He went into a mode of cold, mechanical survival. He was a fixer. He dealt with logistics. If a ship sank, he found another route. If a deal went south, he found a loophole. He grabbed his phone and dialed Arthur Pendleton, his personal attorney and longtime friend. "Julian?" Arthur's voice was groggy. It was barely 6 a.m. on a Saturday. "I thought you were in Tokyo. What time is it over there?" "I'm home," Julian said. his voice terrifyingly calm. "She knows, Arthur. She knows everything." "Who? Elena?" Arthur sounded confused. "Knows what?" "About Aspen. About Isabel. She's gone. She took Harrison. And Arthur, she changed his name." "She what?" The sleep vanished from Arthur's voice. "She can't just change a minor's name without the father's consent. That's standard procedure. Unless what?" Julian snapped, pacing the empty office. "Unless she had cause to file for an emergency ex parte order. Or if she proved. Julian, did you sign anything before you left? Anything at all?" Julian racked his brain. The rush to leave for Tokyo. Elena had been so sweet, so helpful. She had brought him a stack of papers the morning of his flight. Insurance updates, she had said. Just boring admin stuff for the house and the cars. He had signed them while drinking his espresso, checking his watch, eager to get to Isabel. "She gave me papers," Julian whispered. "Insurance forms." "You didn't read them?" Arthur's voice rose an octave. "I trusted my wife, Arthur. Who reads the fine print on car insurance renewals? Get those papers to me. Now. But first, check your liquidity. If she's this far ahead of us, she's not just looking for a divorce. She's looking for a demolition." Julian hung up and logged into his primary banking app. Access denied. He frowned. He tried the joint account. Account closed. His heart hammered against his ribs. He opened the app for his private investment portfolio, the one he thought was impenetrable. Balance 0.00. "No," he laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. "That's impossible." He called the bank's VIP line. "This is Julian Blackwood. Why are my accounts showing 0? "One moment, Mr. Blackwood," the operator said. The silence stretched for an agonizing minute. "Sir, it appears the funds were transferred out on December 27th, pursuant to an execution of a marital asset agreement and fraud protection hold." "Fraud protection?" "Yes, sir. There was a flag on the account regarding suspicious activity in Aspen, Colorado, followed by a large transfer authorized by the joint holder, Mrs. Elena Blackwood, to a secured escrow account under the supervision of Sterling and Vance, LLP. Julian dropped the phone. Sterling, her maiden name. Her father wasn't a lawyer, but her uncle was, a shark named Robert Sterling, who had never liked Julian. He realized then that he had no car keys. His spare set was gone. He had no cash. His credit cards were likely frozen. He was standing in a freezing house, in a designer suit, with nothing but the Japanese whiskey in his briefcase. He needed to find her. He needed to see Harrison. He ran out to the Mercedes. Fortunately, the key fob was still in his pocket. He fired the engine and reversed out of the driveway, gravel spraying violently. He knew where she would go. Her parents had a brownstone in Boston and a summer estate in Newport. Newport was closer. He drove like a madman, the speedometer touching 110 mph on I-95. As he drove, the reality of the name change gnawed at him. Harrison Sterling. Why that? Why the rush? Why not just fight for custody? Then it hit him. The Blackwood family trust. His father, the late Cornelius Blackwood, was a man of archaic principles. The trust, worth nearly $40 million, was set to pay out to the first male heir upon their 3rd birthday. Harrison turned 3 in 2 weeks, but the clause. Julian remembered the old man's raspy voice, reading the will. To the male issue bearing the legal surname of Blackwood. If Harrison wasn't a Blackwood on his 3rd birthday, the trust didn't pay out to the child. It dissolved back into the charitable foundation run by the board of directors. Wait, if the money didn't go to Harrison, it went to the foundation. But if Harrison remained a Blackwood, Julian, as the trustee, would have had control over that $40 million until the boy was 21. He had been counting on that money to cover the massive debts he'd racked up, leveraging the company for his own bad investments. Elena knew. She didn't change the name to hurt Julian's feelings. She changed the name to bankrupt him. She was burning $40 million of her own son's inheritance just to make sure Julian couldn't touch a cent of it. "You spiteful witch!" Julian screamed, slamming his hands on the steering wheel. He pulled up to the gates of the Sterling estate in Newport an hour later. The massive iron gates were shut. He'd laid on the horn. A voice came through the intercom. It wasn't Elena. It was a man's voice. Deep, gravelly. "Go home, Julian." "Let me in, Robert," Julian yelled at the speaker. "She kidnapped my son. I'm calling the police." "Call them," Robert Sterling replied calmly. "We've already spoken to the sheriff. They have the footage, Julian." "What footage?" "The doorbell camera footage from your house," Robert said, "and the audio recordings from inside the nursery, the ones where you discussed your financial creativity with your mistress on speakerphone while you thought you were alone, and the footage from the Aspen chalet. Did you know the owner is a client of mine?" Julian went cold. "Elena isn't here, Julian," Robert continued, "and you aren't going to find her. But you have a court date on Tuesday. I suggest you bring a better lawyer than Arthur Pendleton." "Oh, and Julian." "What?" Julian choked out. "Happy New Year." The intercom clicked off. Julian sat in the silence of the car, looking at the formidable gates. He realized then that this wasn't a sudden break. This was an ambush. Elena had been planning this for months, maybe years. He put the car in reverse, his hands shaking so hard he could barely steer. He had to regroup. He had to find a flaw in her plan. But first, he had to survive the night. He drove to the nearest hotel, a Marriott on the harbor. He walked to the front desk, slapping down his platinum Amex. "One night. Sweet," he demanded. The young woman behind the counter swiped the card. She frowned. She swiped it again. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, looking up with a polite, pitying smile. "Declined. Try this one." He threw down his Visa. "Declined. MasterCard." "Declined, sir. It says card reported stolen." Julian stared at the terminal. He had no money, no home he could heat, no family. He turned and walked out of the lobby, the shame burning his face like acid. He sat in his car, checking his fuel gauge. Quarter of a tank, enough to get back to the empty house. His phone buzzed, a text from Isabel. "Hey babe, miss you already. Did you tell the Wicked Witch yet? Can't wait to be the new Mrs. Blackwood." Xoxo Julian looked at the message. A laugh bubbled up in his throat, dark and dangerous. Isabel. The reason for all of this. If Eleanor wanted a war, she would get one. But Julian realized he was fighting a general who had already captured his supply lines before the first shot was fired. He typed a reply to Isabel. "Pack a bag. Come to the house. We need to talk." He wasn't done yet. If he was going down, he was going to make sure he dragged everyone else down with him. But he had no idea that the name change was only the first domino. Elena had left another surprise for him, one that he wouldn't find until he tried to enter his office at Blackwood Logistics on Monday morning. To understand how Julian Blackwood's life had been dismantled with the precision of a controlled demolition, one had to rewind the clock 3 months. It hadn't started with a private investigator. It hadn't started with a lipstick stain on a collar. It started with a cracked iPhone 12. It was a Tuesday evening in October. Julian had upgraded to the latest model and tossed his wiped old phone onto the kitchen counter. "Let Harrison play games on it," he had said dismissively, rushing out the door for a client dinner that was actually a date with Isabel at a sushi bar downtown. Elena had picked up the phone. She wiped the screen with her sleeve. Julian was meticulous about his appearance, but lazy about his digital hygiene. He had deleted the photos, yes. He had signed out of his email, but he hadn't disabled the iCloud keychain sync before he handed it over. When Elena connected the phone to the house Wi-Fi to download a coloring app for Harrison, the phone pinged. It began to populate, not with apps, but with passwords. And then the Notes app updated. Eleanor wasn't a snooper by nature. She was a woman who prided herself on trust. But curiosity is a human instinct, and there was a note at the top of the list titled simply, Aspen. She opened it. It wasn't a packing list. It was an itinerary of lies. Deck 25, Deck 30, the chalet at Silver Creek. Guest, Isabel M. Cover story, Tokyo merger with Kaito Systems. Budget, $45K, use the offshore account. Elena stared at the screen. The room didn't spin. She didn't cry. A strange, icy clarity settled over her, a phenomenon known to psychologists as emotional dissociation. She was observing her life from the ceiling. She saw a woman holding a phone, realized her marriage was a fraud, and realized her husband was not just a cheater, but a cliché. She didn't confront him when he came home that night, smelling of sake and expensive perfume. She kissed his cheek. She asked about the client. She played the part of the doting wife. The next morning, while Julian was at work, Elena drove to Newport. She didn't go to her parents. She went straight to the law offices of Sterling and Vance. Her uncle, Robert Sterling, was a man who legally dismembered corporations for sport. He sat behind his oak desk, listened to Elena's story, and looked at the screenshots she had printed. "Divorce is messy, Elena," Robert said, steeping a bag of Earl Grey tea. "He has good lawyers. He'll hide assets. He'll fight for 50-50 custody just to avoid paying full support. And he'll win partial custody because the courts don't care about adultery as much as they used to." "I don't want child support," Elena said, her voice hard. "And I don't want him to have custody. He ignores Harrison. He looks at our son like he's an accessory that doesn't match his outfit. I want him gone, Robert. Completely." Robert sipped his tea. "Then we don't file for divorce." "Not yet. We strike at what he actually loves." "His money," Elena said. "His legacy," Robert corrected. He stood up and pulled a heavy leather-bound file from his shelf. "Your father-in-law, Cornelius, was a brilliant but paranoid man. I helped draft the Blackwood Family Trust 20 years ago. There is a clause. Paragraph 4, Section B." Robert opened the file and pointed to the dense legal text. "The principal sum of $40 million shall be held in trust until the first male heir of the direct Blackwood lineage reaches the age of 3 years. Said funds shall be released to the control of the trustee, Julian Blackwood, for the benefit of the heir, provided that the heir retains the legal surname of Blackwood. Should the heir's name be altered, changed, or otherwise removed from the Blackwood lineage prior to the age of distribution, the trust shall be dissolved and the assets transferred immediately to the Blackwood Charitable Foundation under the governance of the Board of Directors." Elena read it twice. "If Harrison isn't a Blackwood, Julian doesn't get control of the $40 million? Correct. Julian has been borrowing against his future expectation of this money," Robert explained. "I've heard rumors on the street. He's leveraged himself to the hilt. He needs that trust fund payout on Harrison's 3rd birthday to cover his debts. If that money vanishes..." "He's ruined," Elena finished. "But changing a child's name without the father's consent is nearly impossible," Robert warned. "Unless we have his consent." Elena smiled, a ghost of a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He's busy, Robert. He's so busy planning his trip to Aspen. He signs whatever I put in front of him. And so, the trap was set. The morning of his departure for Tokyo, Elena had presented the stack of papers. Buried between the car insurance renewal and the gardener's contract was a document titled Grant of Sole Authority and Petition Waiver. It was full of dense jargon, but essentially it gave Elena power of attorney to make any and all legal changes regarding the status of dependents in his absence, and explicitly waived his right to contest name changes in the event of travel exceeding 5,000 miles. Julian, arrogant and rushed, had signed it. He had signed his own execution order with a Mont Blanc pen, checked his watch, and kissed her goodbye. While he was in the air, flying to meet his mistress, Elena was in a courtroom. The judge, seeing the signed waiver and the notarized affidavit of Julian's travel, granted the name change immediately. Harrison Sterling. It was done. She packed the house in 6 hours. She didn't just leave. She erased the life they had built. She wanted him to come home to a void. She wanted him to feel exactly as empty as she had felt reading that note on his old phone. Monday morning. 8 a.m. Julian woke up in the master bedroom of his freezing house. He had slept in his suit, curled up under the dust covers he had ripped off the furniture. His breath misted in the air. He was hungover, hungry, and fueled by a rage that felt like gasoline in his veins. He had spent Sunday trying to reach friends, borrowing cash, trying to find a lawyer who would take his call. No one did. The silence from his social circle was deafening. It seemed Robert Sterling had made some calls of his own. But Julian had a plan. He was still the CEO of Blackwood Logistics. He was still the boss. He would go to the office, order the CFO to cut him a check from the company reserves, hire a shark from New York, and sue Elena until she begged for mercy. He shaved with cold water, put on a fresh shirt from the dry cleaning bag he had left in the car, and drove the Mercedes to the Blackwood Logistics headquarters in downtown Stamford. The glass tower gleamed in the winter sun. It was his kingdom. Or so he thought. He walked into the lobby, his heels clicking authoritatively on the marble. He nodded at the security guard, a man named Sam who had worked there for 10 years. "Morning, Sam," Julian said, breezing toward the turnstiles. Sam didn't smile. He looked down at his console. "Mr. Blackwood, please stop." Julian paused, holding his keycard to the sensor. The light flashed red. Access denied. "System glitch," Julian muttered, tapping it again. Red. "It's not a glitch, sir," Sam said, stepping out from behind the desk. He was a large man, and for the first time Julian noticed the taser on his belt. "I've been instructed to collect your badge." "Excuse me?" Julian laughed, a sharp, incredulous bark. "I own this building, Sam. I am the CEO. Open the gate." "I can't do that, sir." People were starting to stare. Employees were trickling in, whispering behind their hands. Julian felt the heat rising in his neck. "Call Marcus Thorne," Julian snapped. Marcus was the chairman of the board. "Tell him I'm coming up." "Mr. Thorne is expecting you," Sam said. "But you have to sign in as a visitor, and I have to escort you." The humiliation was physical. It felt like a slap. Julian Blackwood, signing into his own company with a sticky paper badge that read, "Visitor." Sam escorted him into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. They rode in silence. When the doors opened, Julian stormed past the receptionist, heading straight for his corner office. "Julian!" The voice came from the boardroom. Marcus Thorne stood in the doorway. He was an older man, silver-haired, with eyes like flint. Behind him sat the entire board of directors. They weren't supposed to meet until next month. "In here," Marcus said. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. Julian walked into the boardroom. He saw his seat at the head of the table. It was empty, but Marcus gestured to a small chair at the opposite end, the seat usually reserved for junior associates presenting reports. "What is this, Marcus?" Julian demanded, gripping the back of the chair. Why is my badge deactivated? Why are my accounts frozen? Sit down, Julian. I will not sit down. My wife has gone insane, kidnapped my son, and is trying to leverage you against me. I need a transfer of $50,000 immediately to handle this legal situation, and I expect... Marcus slid a file across the long mahogany table. It stopped inches from Julian's hand. We received a notification from the Sterling and Vance firm on Saturday. Marcus said calmly, regarding the dissolution of the Blackwood Family Trust. Julian went pale. That's a personal matter. It has nothing to do with the company. It has everything to do with the company, Marcus retorted, his voice rising. You pledged your personal equity in Blackwood Logistics as collateral for those high-risk loans you took out last year. The loans you swore you would pay back with the trust fund money. The room was deadly silent. The other board members were looking at Julian with a mixture of disgust and pity. The bank called us this morning, Marcus continued. Since the trust is dissolving and the money is going to the charitable foundation, your collateral is worthless. The bank has called the loans. You are insolvent, Julian. I can fix it, Julian stammered. I'll get the name changed back. It's a clerical error. Elena forged my signature. Did she? Marcus pressed a button on the conference phone. Play the recording. A voice filled the room. It was crisp, clear, and undeniably Julian's. Yeah, just put the papers on the desk, Elena. I don't care what they are. Just let me sign them so I can get out of here. I have a plane to catch. It was from the home security system. You signed away your son's name because you were in a rush to meet your mistress, Marcus said, his voice dripping with disdain. And that brings us to the morality clause in your CEO contract. Julian felt like the floor was tilting. Morality clause? That's archaic. No one enforces that. We do, Marcus said. When the CEO's behavior brings public scandal and financial instability to the firm. We are a family logistics company, Julian. Our brand is trust, and you... He looked at Julian as if he were something he'd stepped in. You are a liability. You can't fire me. I have shares. Your shares are being seized by the bank to pay your debts, Marcus said. We voted an hour ago. You are terminated for cause, effective immediately. Julian stood there, his mouth opening and closing. He had lost his wife, his son, his money, and now his title. The only thing he had left was his pride. And then the elevator doors in the lobby chimed. The receptionist looked uncomfortable as she walked in. Mr. Thorne, I'm sorry to interrupt. There is a young woman here to see Mr. Blackwood. She's shouting. Julian closed his eyes. No. Please no. Isabel burst into the boardroom. She was wearing a white faux fur coat and carrying a Louis Vuitton weekender bag. She looked frantic. Julian, she screamed, ignoring the room full of suits. My credit card was declined at the hotel. They kicked me out, and you said to come to the house, but the gates are locked. What is going on? She ran to him, grabbing his arm. Who are these old people? Tell them to leave so we can talk. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus Thorne looked from the 24-year-old mistress to the disgraced CEO. I think we're done here, Marcus said quietly. Sam, please escort Mr. Blackwood and his guest off the premises. Sam stepped forward, his hand on his belt. Julian looked at Isabel. She looked beautiful and expensive. Everything he thought he wanted. Now, she looked like an anchor dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. Get off me, Julian whispered, shaking her hand off his arm. What? Isabel recoiled. I said get off me. Julian roared, the sound echoing off the glass walls. Mr. Blackwood, Sam warned, stepping in between them. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Julian looked around the boardroom one last time. He saw the company logo on the wall, the Blackwood oak tree. It was his name, his family's tree, and he had just been chopped down. He turned and walked out, Isabel trailing behind him, sobbing confused questions. He walked past the employees he used to terrorize, past the receptionist he never bothered to greet. He walked out the front doors and onto the sidewalk. The wind whipped through his coat. He checked his pockets for his car keys, and then he remembered. The company car. The Mercedes S-Class. It was leased in the company's name. Sam was standing at the curb. "I'll need the keys to the vehicle, sir." Julian stared at him. "You're taking the car." "Company property," Sam said, holding out his hand. Julian dropped the keys into Sam's palm. He stood on the sidewalk in downtown Stamford. No car, no job, no money, no home. Isabel was standing next to him, shivering in her short skirt. "Julian," she whined, "how are we getting to the airport? We're going back to Aspen, right?" Julian looked at her. He looked at the street. He started to laugh. It was a broken, manic sound. "We aren't going anywhere, Isabel," he said. "We're walking." "Walking where?" "To the bottom," he said. But Julian Blackwood hadn't hit the bottom yet. Elena wasn't finished. She had one more surprise waiting for him, something that would turn his financial ruin into a criminal nightmare. Because while Julian was focused on the trust fund, he had forgotten about the creative accounting he had done on the joint tax returns that Elena had just handed over to the IRS as part of her innocent spouse relief filing. January in Connecticut is unforgiving, but it was nothing compared to the chill inside the studio apartment Julian Blackwood was currently renting in Bridgeport. It had been 3 weeks since the implosion at Blackwood Logistics. The fall from grace had been steep and jagged. Julian, a man accustomed to 1,000 thread-count sheets and heated floors, was now sleeping on a pull-out couch that smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. Isabel was pacing the small room, her heels clicking on the cheap laminate flooring. The adventure of the downfall had worn off the moment she realized Julian couldn't buy her a replacement flight to Aspen. "We need groceries, Julian," she snapped, looking into the empty mini-fridge. "And not the cheap stuff. I can't eat this processed garbage. My skin is breaking out." Julian sat at the wobbly kitchen table, his head in his hands. He was surrounded by piles of paper, foreclosure notices, credit card lawsuits, and demand letters. "We have $40, Isabel," Julian muttered. "Until I can liquidate the boat, that's it." "You said the boat was seized," she countered, her voice shrill. "I said the yacht was seized, the fishing boat in the marina. I might still have title to that. If I can just get down there without the process servers seeing me." His phone rang. It was the burner phone he had bought at a convenience store. Only one person had this number: Martin Weiss, his personal tax accountant. Julian grabbed it. "Martin, tell me good news. Tell me you found a loophole for the trust." "Julian, shut up and listen to me." Martin's voice was trembling. He sounded like a man who had a gun pointed at his head. "Where are you?" "I'm staying low. Why?" "The IRS is at my office, Julian. Right now. They have agents raiding the file room." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" "Why?" "It's just an audit, Martin. Handle it." "It's not just an audit," Martin hissed. "It's a criminal investigation division raid. They have everything. The Cayman ledgers, the shell companies for the consulting fees, the business trips that were actually vacations. They have it all." "How?" Julian whispered. "That information was on the encrypted drive in my safe. Elena took the drive, but she doesn't have the password. It's military-grade encryption." "She didn't need the drive, Julian," Martin said, his voice breaking. "She filed Form 8857. "Form what?" "Request for innocent spouse relief. It's a provision in the tax code. If a spouse suspects their partner is committing tax fraud on a joint return, they can file for relief to avoid prosecution. But to get it, they have to provide substantial evidence of the other spouse's wrongdoing. Julian dropped into the chair. She gave them everything, Martin continued. She kept a diary, Julian, for 3 years. Every time you came home with cash, every time you bragged about a write-off. She matched your flight logs with your mistress's Instagram posts and submitted them as proof that the expenses weren't business-related. She handed you to the feds on a silver platter to save herself. Martin, you have to fix this. Fix it. I'm trying to stay out of prison myself. I'm cutting a deal, Julian. I'm giving them you. Do not call me again. The line went dead. Julian stared at the wall. Federal prison. Not just bankruptcy. Prison. Who was that? Isabel asked, looking up from her phone. Is money coming? Julian looked at her. He looked at the woman who had cost him his marriage, his son, and now his freedom. He felt a sudden, violent surge of hatred. No, Julian said quietly. The IRS is coming. Isabel froze. The IRS? Like taxes? Like prison, Isabel. They know about the trips. They know I used company funds to pay for your apartment in the city. They know about the jewelry. Isabel's eyes widened. She stood up slowly. Wait. If you used stolen money to buy me things, will they take them back? They'll take everything. Julian laughed darkly. And they'll probably interview you. You're a beneficiary of illicit funds. Isabel didn't scream. She didn't cry. She went into survival mode, much like Julian had weeks ago. She walked to the closet and grabbed her suitcase. Where are you going? Julian asked. I'm leaving, she said, throwing her clothes into the bag. I can't be involved in this. My dad is a judge, Julian. I can't have federal agents knocking on my door. You're leaving me? Julian stood up, knocking the chair over. Now? I have nothing. Exactly, Isabel said, zipping the bag. She turned to him, her face cold and unblemished. You have nothing. And frankly, Julian, you're not that fun when you're poor. She walked to the door. Isabel, he shouted, I did this for you. I ruined my life for you. She paused, hand on the doorknob. She looked back at him with genuine confusion. You didn't do this for me, Julian. You did it because you're a narcissist who thought he could have cake and eat it too. Don't put this on me. I was just the cake. The door slammed. Julian was alone in the silence of the apartment. He walked to the window and watched her get into an Uber. He had hit rock bottom, or so he thought. But as he looked at his reflection in the dirty window, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled shirt, eyes wild with panic, he realized he had one card left to play. Elena. He didn't love her. He realized that now. But she was the architect of his pain. She was the one pulling the strings. If he could just see her, if he could just stand in front of her, he could break her. He could make her feel the guilt. He could use Harrison. He needed to get to Newport. He needed to crash the party. The Sterling estate in Newport was glowing like a lantern against the dark Atlantic Ocean. It was the night of the annual Winter Solstice Gala, a charity event that the Sterlings had hosted for decades. In previous years, Julian had been the guest of honor. He would stride in wearing a $5,000 tuxedo, shaking hands, making jokes, playing the part of the benevolent tycoon. Tonight, he was watching from the bushes near the service entrance. He had hitchhiked to Newport. It had taken him 6 hours. He was wearing his tuxedo, but it was the one he had been wearing the day he was fired. It was stained, wrinkled, and smelled of sweat. He had tried to clean it in a gas station bathroom, but he looked less like a CEO and more like a vagrant in a costume. The security was tight, Private guards patrolled the perimeter, but Julian knew the estate. He knew about the delivery entrance in the back, near the catering tents. He waited until a van from a floral company rolled through the gates. As the gate swung open, Julian sprinted through the shadows, ducking behind a row of neatly trimmed hedges. He made his way to the terrace doors. Inside, the ballroom was alive with music and laughter. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over the crowd. He saw familiar faces, business rivals, old friends, people who had stopped returning his calls. And then he saw her, Elena. She was standing near the orchestra, holding a glass of champagne. She looked breathtaking. She was wearing a midnight blue velvet gown that hugged her figure, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon. She didn't look like a grieving wife. She looked like a queen who had just won a war, and she wasn't alone. She was laughing at something a man was saying. The man was David Vance, a partner at her uncle's law firm, a man Julian had always considered a bore. Rage, hot and blinding, overtook Julian's senses. He didn't care about the plan anymore. He didn't care about leverage. He just wanted to shatter that image of perfection. He pushed the terrace doors open and stepped into the ballroom. The cold wind from the ocean followed him in, causing the candles to flicker. A few people turned to look, then a few more. The chatter died down, replaced by a ripple of uncomfortable whispers. "Julian?" someone murmured. Julian ignored them. He walked straight toward Elena, his footsteps heavy on the parquet floor. He looked deranged, his tie crooked, his eyes bloodshot, his face gaunt. Elena turned. Her smile faded, but she didn't flinch. She set her champagne glass down on a passing waiter's tray with steady hands. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice was calm, amplified by the sudden silence of the room. The orchestra stopped playing. "You look happy," Julian rasped, stopping 5 feet from her. He pointed a shaking finger at her. "You stole my son. You stole my money. You put the feds on me. And you're here drinking champagne." "I didn't steal anything," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly to the captivated audience. "I protected our son from a man who sees people as assets." "I am his father," Julian shouted. The veneer of civilization cracked. "He is a Blackwood. You had no right to change his name." "He is a Sterling now," Elena replied coolly. "Because the name Blackwood is about to become synonymous with federal indictment. I gave him a future, Julian. You were only ever going to give him debts." "I want to see him," Julian advanced on her. David Vance stepped forward, positioning himself between Julian and Eleanor, but Eleanor put a hand on David's arm to stop him. She wasn't afraid. "You want to see him?" Eleanor asked. "Like you saw him on Christmas. Oh wait, you were in Aspen. Like you saw him on his birthday last year. No, you were on a conference call on the golf course. You don't miss Harrison, Julian. You miss the trust fund attached to him." The crowd gasped. It was a public evisceration. "I loved you," Julian lied, his voice cracking. He fell to his knees. It was a performance, a last-ditch effort to win the crowd. "Elena, please, I made a mistake, but don't destroy me. We can fix this." Elena looked down at him. There was no pity in her eyes, only a profound exhaustion. "You know," she said softly, leaning in so only he, and the 50 people closest to them, could hear. "I actually forgave the affair, Julian. When I saw the texts in October, I was ready to go to counseling. I was ready to try." Julian looked up, hope sparking in his eyes. "Then why?" "Because of what you said to your mistress about Harrison," Elena said. Julian froze. "I heard the audio from the nursery," Elena continued. "The camera records sound, Julian. You were changing his diaper before you left. You were on the phone with her. Do you remember what you said?" Julian shook his head, terrified. You said, "I can't wait to get away from this kid. He's such a burden. Once the trust pays out, I'm sending him to boarding school so we can travel." The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. "He was 2 years old," Elena whispered, tears finally glittering in her eyes, not of sadness but of fury. "He was holding your finger, looking at you with pure love, and you were planning to ship him away like cargo so you could party with a 20-year-old. That was the moment you died to me, Julian. The money, the name, the house. That was just the paperwork. The marriage ended in that nursery." Julian knelt there, stunned. He remembered saying it. He had been frustrated. The baby was crying. Isabel was waiting. He had just said it. He hadn't meant it. Or had he? Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. "I think you should go," Elena said, stepping back. "Eleanor." "Security," Robert Sterling's voice boomed from the edge of the room. 2 large men grabbed Julian by the arms. He didn't fight. The energy had left him. The truth of Elena's words had cut the strings that held him up. It wasn't the cheating. It was the cruelty. As they dragged him toward the exit, he looked back. The crowd had already turned away. The orchestra started playing a waltz. Elena picked up her champagne glass, her back to him. She didn't watch him leave. Outside, the flashing blue lights of the Newport police cruisers illuminated the driveway. But there was another car waiting behind them, a black sedan with government plates. 2 men in windbreakers stepped out. The letters on their jackets were yellow and unmistakable. IRS, CID. The police officers handed Julian over to the federal agents. As they handcuffed him, reading him his rights regarding tax evasion and wire fraud, Julian looked up at the mansion one last time. He saw a silhouette in the window of the 2nd floor. A small shadow. A toddler, perhaps, looking out at the lights. "Harrison," Julian whispered. But the boy in the window was no longer Harrison Blackwood. He was Harrison Sterling, and he was safe. Julian was shoved into the back of the federal car. The door slammed shut, sealing him in darkness. 3 years later. The Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, was a far cry from the chalets of Aspen or the boardrooms of Stamford. It was a world of grey concrete, fluorescent lights, and enforced routine. Inmate 49201, Zero Thortos, sat on the edge of his bunk. Julian Blackwood had aged a decade in 3 years. His hair, once thick and styled with Italian pomade, was thinning and grey. His skin, formerly tanned from ski trips and golf outings, was pasty and lined with deep grooves of stress. He wasn't the Wolf of Wall Street anymore. In here he was just Blackwood, the guy who worked in the library sorting paperbacks for 12 cents an hour. The irony wasn't lost on him. He used to move millions of dollars with a keystroke. Now he was trusted only to move Danielle Steele novels from a cart to a shelf. He heard the heavy clank of the cell block gate opening. It was mail call. "Blackwood," the guard barked, tossing a single envelope onto his bunk. Julian picked it up with trembling hands. It was from Arthur Pendleton, the only lawyer who would still take his collect calls, mostly out of morbid curiosity. Julian tore it open. Inside was a clipping from the Wall Street Journal. The headline hit him like a physical blow. Sterling Foundation announces $40 million grant for single mothers and financial literacy programs. There was a photo. It was Eleanor. She looked radiant. She was standing at a podium, cutting a ribbon. Beside her was a 5-year-old boy with bright eyes and a mischievous smile. Harrison. Julian read the article, his eyes devouring the words that sealed his fate. The grant is funded by the dissolved Blackwood Family Trust, which reverted to the charitable foundation 3 years ago. We are turning a legacy of greed into a legacy of hope. said Chairwoman Elena Sterling. "We want to ensure that no woman is ever trapped in a marriage due to financial dependence." Julian dropped the paper. She had won. She hadn't just taken the money away from him. She was using his family's money. The money his father had hoarded, the money Julian had worshipped, to help women escape men like him. He looked at the photo of Harrison again. The boy was wearing a blazer that looked just like the one Julian used to wear, but there was a softness in his face, a joy that Julian had never nurtured. Under the photo, the caption read, "Elena Sterling, with her son, Harrison, and her fiancé, Dr. Daniel Vance." The man from the party, the boring lawyer. He was going to raise Julian's son. He was going to teach Harrison how to shave, how to drive, how to be a man, and he would teach him to be the exact opposite of Julian Blackwood. Julian crumbled the newspaper in his fist. He wanted to scream, but he had no voice left. The rage had burned out long ago, leaving only a hollow, aching cold. He lay back on the hard cot and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the text message he had sent that night in December. "She's asleep. Just hold on." She hadn't been asleep. She had been awake. And because of that, Julian would be asleep to the world for the next 7 years of his sentence. But the final twist of the knife wasn't the money, or the prison, or even the new fiancé. It was the book lying on the table of his cellmate. His cellmate, a rough man named Miller, was reading a paperback with a glossy cover. "Hey, Blackwood," Miller chuckled, holding up the book. "Your girl sure can write." Julian looked at the cover. The Aspen Affair, Surviving a Narcissist and Finding Myself, by Isabel Martin. It was a New York Times bestseller. Isabel had written a tell-all. She had painted herself as the naive victim and Julian as the manipulative monster. She was on talk shows. She had a podcast. She was making millions, telling the world how terrible Julian Blackwood was. Julian closed his eyes. Elena had the dignity. Isabel had the fame. Harrison had a father who loved him. And Julian? Julian had a library shift in 10 minutes. He stood up, smoothed out his beige jumpsuit, and walked toward the door. The smartest man in the room had finally learned his lesson, but he had learned it in a room he couldn't leave. And that is the story of Julian Blackwood, a man who thought he could treat his family like a business asset, only to find out that his wife was the CEO of his downfall. It's a brutal reminder that silence doesn't always mean ignorance. Sometimes, the person you think you're fooling is just quietly gathering the ammunition to destroy you. Elena didn't scream, she didn't fight, and she didn't beg. She simply changed one name on a piece of paper and let Julian's own arrogance do the rest. Julian lost his freedom, his fortune, and his legacy because he forgot the most important rule of all. You never betray the person who holds the keys to your castle. What do you think? Was Eleanor's revenge too harsh, or did Julian get exactly what he deserved? And what would you have done if you found that note on the phone? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a lottery winner whose husband tried to hide the ticket. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening. And remember, the truth always comes out, usually when you least expect it.